Welcome everyone to the first ever TJbletop. I am your humble bard, TJ, come to tell you a story from the dice table. Or at least I should be telling you a dice story. That is basically what the idea behind this series is going to be. Though also I should say thank you to Sam from my Discord who provided me with such a lovely punny name that I immediately loved, and we're sticking with it whether it's cringy or not, because I kind of love it. But I'm here to tell you about my adventures in Dungeons & Dragons and various other role-playing games that I've dabbled in throughout the years, and I can't really do any of that until I tell you about the main character that we are going to be talking about, the character that I've been running most recently and for the longest that I've been running any character from a D&D history, and that would be someone I have dubbed Mirari. To understand Mirari, we have to go back. This is a character that has lived in my head for a long time, many years before I actually brought him to the dice table. And it starts with a series called Counter Monkey. This was done by Noah Antweiler, the spoony one of the Spoony Experiment from the golden age of the internet reviewer. We're not going to get into Spoony and his current state of affairs, but just suffice to say, I really wish he would get the help that he obviously needs because he used to be amazing. And when he did Counter Monkey, it was a lot of stories and weird stories about his time with Dungeons & Dragons and role-playing in general, because he did a ton of it. But it was also a bit of an advice column. And eventually I kind of want to do the same if I get a good idea here and there. But one of the things that he went on about were the conventions and the typical things and the stereotypes you would see in Dungeons and Dragons, and how to subvert them and how to go against them. And things like that always spurred ideas into my head because that was the intention behind videos like that. And that's kind of where Mirari begins. Now, if you look at Mirari, you look at his overall design, what you see is what is apparently a very colorful bard with his wild white hair and a bright yellow cape and two-tone green outfit. You'll notice he is doing something with his lute that most bards would not do, swinging it. See, that is because the reality is that Mirari is not a bard. Mirari is a druid who is using a false identity, which means he's disguised as a bard. The lute is actually his club. It is a stringless lute that is solid wood that he has dubbed El Kabong. Early levels, this meant I was going around whacking kobolds in the head with a fake lute, and it was wonderful. Now, that's just where the beginning of the character is, just the core idea behind it. I wanted to play against the stereotypical druid, dressed up in leaves and antlers and very much of nature himself. And this is a character who lived amongst nature because he was trying to avoid the law. And I wanted him to be one of those quiet types that, very typical life, very normal, everyday kind of guy who's just kind of thrust into the adventure and thrust into all of this trouble that the world has caused him. Very kind of classic adventurer stuff. But I wanted to throw twists into that too. I set him up in his quiet little town. I gave him a wife. I gave him a child on the way. And then I took him away from that. I had someone abduct him, frame him for a murder, and thus he had to be on the run. The way I set it up, he has no idea where his hometown is. Tiny little town. Almost nobody has ever heard of it. And wherever he was taken a long, long way away. Now, the real reason behind the disguise is because of Spoony's episode about the D&D dress code, where it always seemed like that certain types always dressed in certain ways. Druids wore leaves and antlers and bones and things like that, natural things. And rogues always wore black leathers and very, very dark tones. And Wizards always wore robes, and if you were a good wizard, it was blue and white robes. If you were a bad wizard, it was black robes, and like that's very typical stuff, very typical archetype stuff. And he made a point that it's very silly when you do that because it gives away what you are. You never want an enemy or another player to go, "Hey, druid, go do the thing." No, you don't. You want to encourage them to actually remember your name, because if like I'm dressed up as a bard and he says, "Hey, druid, go do that," I go, "What druid? I don't know who you're talking about." So that is kind of the idea, and I kind of wanted to play with that and make sure that Mirari stood out as a character, not just an archetype. So that was the idea. The character who is hopelessly lost, and I didn't want him to do the typical adventurer thing of finding love along the way, rescuing the damsel and making her yours, and the typical stuff. I wanted him to have a goal to get back home, to see his wife, see his unborn, or at this point in the story, born child. I wanted that to be a motivating factor, but I also wanted it to be a factor of temptation, the concern about what is happening. I wanted to set it up so that at certain level he'd be able to peek in and like magically view his wife, and I wanted him to be scared of that, and I wanted to allow the DM to provide some kind of mystery for what he saw. And then I wanted it to be a big deal when he could use transport via plants to just go back home no matter where he was. That's the kind of thing I wanted to set up, So a gradual growth of the character and a gradual reveal of what was actually happening at home. Now, because of certain circumstances, not all of that actually happened, and we might get into that in a different video. For now, know that Mirari was very much not your typical druid. He had a charlatan background because he was trying to escape the law. The DM had never seen this before. A druid that was actually a charlatan. This is a druid who had a +5. No. Scratch that. +9 in deception with advantage. My druid was the talker of the group, the one that would just nonsense their way into a situation with a lot of lies and falsehoods and honeyed words, and that's fun. Like, fortunately, I'm not too bad at improv, so a lot of that ended up working out pretty well. And of course, he is a druid who rolled the best stats I've ever rolled in my life. The DM at the time, the DM of the first game Mirari was in, he would attest to that. He watched me do it. His eyes were rolling as I rolled because he was just that good. So yeah, a character that had spun around in my head for at least 3-4 years. And by the time I actually got to make him, oh my god, he came out so good. I was so happy with how Mirari turned out because I wasn't going for like a min-max kind of character. I was going for someone whose traits and attributes, what he had for like feats and what his background gave him made sense for his story. Not stuff that like specifically gave me a million advantages in combat or, ways of just like, manipulating anybody I wanted to with just a few words. No, I wanted to have very specifically, I wanted to have all traits and background abilities that just played to the character, what he would have, what he would do, what he would learn. And it's turned out well. Aside from just being really good and really unique, it also made him a very strong character. And that's more or less everything you want to do with a D&D character. If you want to go murder hobo and just make someone who can bash things as hard as possible, there's nothing wrong with that. D&D is a game where everyone has fun in their own way, and what is fun to me isn't going to be fun to you. Some people have fun being the healer. Some people have fun being the mouthpiece of the group. And some people just like to whack goblins with axes. All of that's fine. Play it the way you want. That's the idea. So I was thrilled that my character started coming out the way that I always hoped that he would after being in my head for so long. certain things didn't work out the way that I wanted, but hey, we'll get into that. And that's basically what you need to know. So Mirari is my druid, who started off in a very interesting little place that I was hoping would take him very far. And so far it has, but not in the way I actually expected. Oh, and just because you might be asking at this point, the name Mirari is a name that my character, whose real name was Ren, completely made up on his own. It is actually a Latin word. It is a Latin word that means to look upon in awe. And in modern English, it's where we get the word mirror. And I thought, for a guy pretending to be a bard, that seems like just the stage name he would pick. So my alternate identity became Mirari. Mirari is also the word where we derive the English phrase mirage. I love double meanings to my names. It's pretty common that if you run a name of mine through Google Translate, you'll figure out a little bit of their backstory or a little bit of what they're really up to. Or if you just think about the name long enough, maybe an idea will occur to you. Either way, I kind of love it. I kind of love throwing in the little clues with the names. So that's what you need to know about my druid, Mirari, a character that I have now been playing in a campaign for, I think now, just over a year. Longest I've ever played a character, and has done so many cool things, because D&D lets you do so many cool things. So we are going to go over them. We'll tell a little bit of backstory in the next episode, just so you know what I had to do in order to actually get to the point where I could play as Mirari. But I figured this is a good starter video. If anyone tunes in late or comes in mid-series or something, this is the only episode you should need to know and see in order to know what's going on. So, let's begin next time.